I'm 81. I'll be 82 in August. I'm in good health. I have no disabilities or diseases. I've got a really good education, and I've got interesting work to do that makes it easier for me to deal with the undeniable difficulties of being old, as well as the loneliness and the too often ensuing depression that comes if you're alone too much. A few weeks ago, on a bitterly cold morning, I had to make my way downtown for a 9:30 meeting. I needed to get there without confessing to anybody my problems with travel. I have poor balance now, so I can't risk the train anymore. You know, the way it stops, I just fall down. It's too cold on that particular morning for me to stand around waiting for a bus and then having to walk at the other end. And buses are jerky and bumpy and they can wear you out, you know. And I'm now phobic about driving anywhere outside of my neighborhood. So I bundled up and took a cab. And when our meeting was over, I put back on all my heavy outdoor clothes, and at the main exit, I stopped to check out with the young woman who sat at the desk behind a high counter, furiously typing. She rose right up, thrust an iPad at me, asked me to type my name, etc., and quickly sat back down, went back to typing. I was taken totally by surprise at being handed an electronic tool instead of a clipboard, or having her simply type the answers herself. So I accepted it, because I didn't know what else to do, and stared at it with what must have been obvious confusion. So I tried to get the iPad into a position where glare from the windows all around me was minimized. And it was harder because I didn't have my reading glasses with me. And I had on all my bulky winter clothes, my mitts, my scarf, you know, the whole bit. So after a second, she whisked herself upright again, smiling fiercely, and said briskly, but with barely hidden impatience, "Here, I'll do it for you." And she took the iPad from me before I could even say anything. So I stood there feeling like an imbecile, wanting to yell, "Hey, I'm not stupid. I can type, I can spell my name." But it was all happening so fast, and I knew I was being childish, so I just stood there surprised, feeling humiliated, and especially later, angry. It's a totally trivial incident, but it is emblematic of the ageism that runs through the daily world of the elder, at least in my universe, Elder Bear. In the tiny town nearest my old home, government funds built attached affordable housing for a few seniors. This is a town of 600 people, way out in the middle of nowhere. I think they built 4 units. And I thought, what a great thing, until one warm spring day I happened to drive by, and the door of the end unit was open, and in the gap, a retired farmer sat in his wheelchair staring out at the world. I could not believe how minuscule the room behind him was, barely space for his wheelchair. Why was that considered to be good enough for an old person? Is it because, after all, he's going to die soon, and what does he need all that space for anyway? The consideration of what living in such minute quarters might do to his mental health was apparently non-existent. He'd lived out his time, he wasn't worth much anymore, and he didn't have the rights of a younger person. This is an example of systemic ageism, and it demoralizes, humiliates, and makes ordinary life for the elderly even harder to endure. Every time we go out in public, old people have to accept and deal with the fact that, and I think this is a direct thing we don't really ever talk about, but I've really felt it, that we are no longer beautiful in the conventional sense, in the way younger people are, that various physical issues common in the old, plus normal body changes, means you can't even be fashionable. You just buy clothes that will hang on you because they don't fit the way they used to. And if you don't have money, you will find very quickly that clothes for old people are ugly. If you have money, you can buy fashionable clothes. If you can diet, I'm a woman. So, you know. So whenever people younger than you are involved in a situation, you may feel sad and uncomfortable because too often younger people just ignore you, and some actively don't like looking at you because they think you're ugly. And along with ugly, of course, goes stupid. It is as though they think you aren't really quite human anymore. This kind of ageism, the constant slighting of one kind or another, the disrespect, the failure to understand, and even the unkindness makes it not only unpleasant to be out in the world, but sometimes, as we all know all over the world, it's dangerous too. I've called this talk a day in the life, but it would be better perhaps to call it a week in the life. I'm just going to race through this talk because that would mean about 25 minutes if I don't keep stopping to do what I'm doing right now. Although 3 of the following incidents happened on the same day, and at least a couple of them are background to my daily life. Sunday morning, a 93-year-old friend in an assisted living facility phoned. She had developed a deeply loving, intimate, but non-sexual relationship with an 88-year-old gentleman who also lived there. After an evening spent together in the lounge, they each went upstairs to their own rooms, saying they would meet again in the morning. But the next morning, the gentleman failed to appear. Because of the privacy laws, the staff was forbidden to tell her anything. But bit by bit, from various sources, she learned that just after he left her the night before, he had had a stroke, fallen, hit his head very hard, bled copiously, and died. She, who had recently suffered the death of her eldest son, and because of COVID regulations couldn't go to him as he died, and before that, the death through dementia of her husband, was now devastated again. The next day, walking home from the grocery store, a woman I barely knew stopped me. I didn't even really know her. I didn't recognize her, but she knew who I was. She told me she had had an awful week and was walking alone to try to calm down and figure out how she could keep going. "I'm 88, she said, in a pleading tone. Her 94-year-old husband was ill, and every single day that week she had had to get him dressed, get him into his wheelchair, downstairs and into the car, drive him to labs for blood tests, elsewhere for a transfusion, and then for more lab tests. They had married late in life. They'd both been married before, and they had been so happy to find each other. And now, she said, throwing out her hands, this. Meaning it never occurred to me when we married that our relationship would soon deteriorate to me being his nurse and attendant, and I am worn out, I'm exhausted, and I'm at my wit's end. And I didn't feel it was my place to say to her, there's home care, there are agencies that you can pay for who will do the driving, etc. I just let her talk. Well, the next day, I stopped to ask a neighbor I've known for quite a few years now, who was out walking her dog, how her very debilitated 90-year-old husband was doing. Between the dementia and physical ailments and now his extreme fragility, I do not know how much more of this I can do. It's terrible for both of us, she said. And yet, shaking her head and turning away from me, she said, he just won't give up. An odd thing to say, right? Interesting thing to say. When I got home, there was a text from another friend with a photo of her 70. This is true. This all happened like bang, bang, bang. It's not unusual. With a photo of her 78-year-old husband dressed and sitting in a chair, a guy I just love. Although he looked like death warmed over, as we say, and she was so happy because he'd nearly died after his cancer surgery and she thought he was gone. And now there'd been a turnaround, and look at this. I cheered too, but of course I was thinking, how long is he going to be with her about the possible spread of that cancer, and how on earth was she going to manage without him? Anyway, she's younger than I am. A friend I'd had coffee with had told me she had begun having falls and indicated the spot where she'd had her last one. Did you trip? I asked. And then I looked and I could see there was nothing for her to trip on. It was her living room, hardwood floor. And then, to cover my confusion, I went on to tell her that my 84-year-old sister had had falls caused by nothing that we could see, but that had blackened her eyes and raised lumps on the back of her head and left her unconscious briefly. And it turned out she had very high blood pressure. But my friend said, yes, true, but my blood pressure's well controlled. And then, as the first woman did, she turned away from me and said, we're doing tests. And I thought right away, non-medical person, I just remembered the friend I just lost to Parkinson's. And one of my closest friends I now rarely see had just been in hospital again, severe COPD. And when she goes to the hospital, you never know if she's coming out or not. She'd be 80 now. And another friend whose husband had just died in his 70s, and I knew her life story, and this wasn't the first significant loss. So you'll be thinking, I can see you thinking, what's the point of this litany of sorrows? I was raised a Catholic. I know what a litany is. First, that this is how my days go now that I live in the world of the old. Bad news mostly. And second, to point out to you who are still young that the elderly, behind their calm, their good sense, their often endless patience and kindness, or their crankiness, obstinacy, forgetfulness, and steady anger, are all of us living in sorrow. It is a sorrow that goes with moving into the end years of one's life, when it seems as if the significant people of your life are dropping like flies all around you. Besides the loss of my family members and my husband, I have since lost 2 men, one after the other, I hasten to point out, after my husband's death when I was I was 66, almost 67. With whom I had had significant relationships, one of them to lung cancer and one to a complicated and horrendous illness. And frankly, I think it was suicide. If you want to understand what it's like to be old, remember the fact that we live in the midst of a barren field scarred with the remains of our beloved dead. Grief, mostly well hidden, you didn't hear about it from the elder this morning, is the background of our lives. It's part of the reason why we maybe know a thing or two younger people don't know. So I expected to be speaking to a room full of young people, students, so I'm telling you things you probably already know, and I have to apologize for that too. But I did think I need to reiterate that I never think of the old, as just a blanket group of everybody all the same, but I have learned to think in terms of the young old, the middle old, and the old. And I'm just about in the old category, and I think we have one guest this morning who would have reached that age too. I mean, he's older than I am. As far as anybody knows, there never was a golden time when the elders were well treated by society. This because it was not a society that we know of anyway that had so many old people in it. People died young. Old people were rare. In the late 19th century in Canada, only about 2% of people lived to be old, while in about 20 years now, 26% of the population will be elderly, we're told. And therefore, we're in a brand new situation. It's no wonder we're in chaos to some extent. So many people living into old age, and us without strategies and just grabbing hold of ideas about how to deal with this, and with us old guys ourselves. And lastly, which I'm sure you all know, most elderly people are women because of the differential in the, what's the expression, when people die, whatever that is. And I just saw in the news, as I'm sure you did too, the number of centenarians these days, 9,545, of whom over 7,000 are women. And the only good news, which because you're in medicine you would already know, is that this gap between male and female I still haven't got the word age of death. What is it? Life expectancy. Thank you. Is narrowing. I don't know why, but I'm delighted to hear it because, boy, it's tough being an old lady these days if you still want a social life. Believe me, you too will come to this. Hard as it is, I know, to absorb this knowledge fully, even though your conscious mind grasps it and you say it all the time. But we old guys say to each other, friend, consider the alternative. And if you're lucky, someday if you're lucky, someday some or all of these attendant aggravations may be yours too. And I'm speaking as someone past 80, not a 65-year-old who's just getting the barest hint of what's to come. We sleep badly all the time. We struggle with incipient incontinence. Our gastrointestinal tracts no longer work well. We have to deal with touchy stomachs and we have to watch our diets every meal, every day. And some of us have a steady condition of either constipation or sometimes diarrhea that prevent us from going anywhere on the spur of the moment. We need hearing aids, both ears, and they wouldn't work this morning. I nearly died, but I finally banged them and they got going. Not a few of us need glasses and eye drops to forestall a glaucoma, or as with two of my friends, periodic shots in the eye, which are great fun, as you can imagine, to stave off macular degeneration. Our hair falls out every time we watch it. I look at the backs of the heads of all my friends and you can see scalp. Me too. I'm just busily covering it up now. We wake in the morning with a knee that for a few minutes won't support us, or that aches steadily for hours before simply stopping, or it's the other knee, or else it's one hip or the other, or else it's a foot. Our skin is sagging and loosening, and I'm covering up all my sunspots and age spots. I've had cancer twice on my nose. The second time it was quite major. And so I'm covering up the scars. And we don't have a lot of stamina, despite those minuscule few the media loves to dwell on, who at 90 run marathons. I think not good thoughts about them. We have steady postnasal drip problems and croaky voices from it. And last but hardly least, our short-term memories are unreliable and dementia always threatens, especially if it's running in your family. You were reminded at every turn of your mortality. So if I'm going out for an evening, I start planning several days ahead, which I almost never do because I can't drive at night, and no men in my life, and my friends can't drive at night either. So mostly we just stay home and watch TV. I think another thing is, am I going to be able to drink a glass of wine? If I have to refuse it, how am I going to do it gracefully without revealing that I am physically a wreck? Or, it kind of, well, never mind. Anyway, so that's how I live my life outside my condo, by careful preparation, looking ahead, and considering the possibilities that might ruin my rare time out. Now, I'm healthy. That's just age wearing out the body, Do not fall. A doctor friend who was visiting her nonagenarian parents, one of whom had just had a bad fall, wrote to me, all we elders keep reminding each other, don't fall. A bad fall will be the end of us, and we know it. At this moment, my skinned knee there's still a scar though, has healed, and the bruises on my legs are faded. I was out walking, tripped on an uneven sidewalk because I think there's something wrong now with the way I lift my right foot, and because I can see on the wearing on the toe of the shoe that it's not like it used to be. So I have to keep thinking about that. And I think I was walking at a brisk pace, because if you don't, what's the point of walking? And off I went. And 6 weeks ago before that, I fell flat on my face And there was no cracked sidewalk anywhere because I got up and looked and walked up and down and there was nothing. I think it was that right foot thing again. I tripped over myself. And luckily nothing was broken. I didn't get the raccoon eyes or anything, didn't hit my face. Yet, you people are urging us to keep fit at all costs, to go for walks, keep active. And of course, I don't want to fall, but if I do the necessary things to keep from falling, I won't go very far or very fast, and it won't keep me fit. I mean, I'm upright. That's good enough. And here's another one. I need to be outside every day. You spend 33 years in the countryside. It is hell to be locked in a building where you can't even open the windows and no one to take you out. In my case, of course, I go out every day. I went to visit my younger sister, 4 years younger than me, in a care center in Vancouver, just a little over a year now, because of dementia, which was caused by having had her heart during a major coronary event restarted 9 times. And she's now in care. And when I got there, as nearly as her daughter and I could figure out, she hadn't been out the door outside in 6 months. And it's a beautiful place and she's well looked after. It's just like not enough staff, that people don't consider we're still people. We need to go out, Anyway, I can't wait until I can stop driving. I find it so stressful and uncertain, but I keep driving because otherwise, how am I going to get to doctor, dentist, ophthalmologist, to buy groceries, to go to a movie, a play, a concert, or out to lunch with my friends? Because although I'm happy to be able to say lots of people can't afford to take taxis all the time. And if I can't drive, all the spontaneity will be gone from my life, and worse, already pretty homebound, I'll become a virtual prisoner in my condo. I know about this stuff because all my friends are old women like myself, and this is what we talk about. Even though we laugh and giggle and have fun and drink wine, if we can manage it. And, we got stuff to talk about, but I'm coming out of the middle of the realm of aged women. I'm not just talking about myself. So even though here I am sketching a picture to you of a horrible situation that must make you wonder why on earth we'd even want to stay alive, and despite the pills and the fear of driving, in fact, my body can't really be trusted anymore to keep me upright. And I'm able to talk to you. I'm making sense, I think. And I'm able to stand up while I'm doing it, as long as it isn't longer than an hour. That's why I can't bird watch, because that's an hour and a half. Can't do it anymore. And having made my preparations, I'm enjoying myself up here. I'm having a good time, even as I tell you how awful my life is. It isn't awful at all. But most of us if we have the right attitude, these small malfunctions I've been whining about are manageable with care and are certainly preferable to being dead. So, how the heck do we do this? Well, by working hard to maintain the right attitude. We old women say nobody's going to take care of us because we're all widows or divorced 40 years ago and our kids are in Hawaii or China or heaven's sakes knows where. And so we say to each other, we have to look after each other because nobody else will. And that's how we survive. Like I had a younger friend lined up if that cab didn't show up to drive me here. She's got 4-wheel drive. I don't. So by working hard to maintain the right attitude, by focusing on the now, like I'm great today, this is a good day, and attending to the details we never used to think about, and being glad it seems to go with age for the tiniest things that we never even noticed when we were young. And also by refusing the rage that we would think we'd be entitled to, and bitterness. Don't go there. That is a big mistake for your brain. And we do it with willpower and with plain old courage and drugs, which are at the same time also the bane, as you know, as medical people, of the elderly. A couple of nurses explained to me when I was worried about my sister, the one with dementia. I didn't know why these things were happening, and they were 80 years old, and they said, with old people, it's always about the drugs. So, good side, bad side. So, and with the help from other friends and family. So, as we all know, some people they just won't give up. They just go on and on with the driving, etc. And when they don't have quick reflexes anymore, or hear, see too poorly, or are addled by their medication regime, or another thing is that our minds don't work as quickly in reaction to stimuli. And when you're out in heavy, fast traffic, that's a heck of a dangerous situation to be in. I just won't drive in those conditions. I can see it coming, but I'm not quite there yet. But the really hard part, as people are starting to realize, is that we live in solitude and are often very lonely. Most of us, not all of us. I sometimes do, but not the last while. I've been too busy. And loneliness leads to depression, and depression, as finally medical people are admitting, leads to illness, and illness leads to the most horrifying possibility of all, long-term care. So it's absolutely essential to start mitigating the loneliness to the extent that anyone else can do it, of old people, I mean. So as for myself, I miss kids. I miss children. Oh my God. I just miss them so much. Little ones, they're wonderful. I miss having a normal life. What happened to my life? I miss being included in the world. And I miss in particular being part of the literary world in the way that I used to be. Man, I was always running around the country. Nobody even asks me. It's festival season. I am not on anybody's list. And I think it's ageism. I don't think it's anything else. So I'm saying it's ageism. The dilemma, there aren't that many old writers around. You'd think they'd cherish me, but nope. The dilemma of seniors is that we need to learn to accept, I'm winding up, by the way, that we need to learn to accept what we have become and what will become of us, and learn to manage our last years gracefully, and as if we were still as fully alive and as incurably curious and delight-filled small children as the incurably curious and delight-filled small children we once were. As an old person still coping, and all my friends, we live in fear, I can tell you, of what comes next for us. I don't know anybody who can afford to bring in 24-hour care if we have no family around. And we wouldn't feel we could trust such people anyway. I personally know of one case in which the gentleman in question, they might make us prisoners in our own homes, take over our bank accounts, fail to look after us, all of which happened to this man until a faraway daughter she took care of it. I personally know I already said that. The first choice is never to get old. The second choice is, if we can afford it, to go into assisted living places. And at those famous ladies who lunches, which I'm now included in, to my horror, we discuss possible scenarios, contrast and compare them, including offing ourselves as an option when things start to look too awful. Most of us would do anything to avoid long-term care, but we know we're probably not going to have a choice when the time comes anyway. And then I have a paragraph on downsizing, the horrors of downsizing, which to us isn't death. It's the too long prelude to death. The endless decline that we all dread so much that it seems better to gloss over it quickly and change the subject. But it's always there in the back of your mind. What am I going to do when, you know? However, I do want to point out from having friends in good assisted living homes that despite the drawbacks, most of those people are far healthier and happier than they were living alone in a condo or a house. And I would say that definitely applies to almost everyone I know until the health situation gets worse and worse. And I would say among my friends, the worst complaint was during COVID, of course, when those people had absolutely no choice about going out or where they went out or even, getting out of their rooms even. It was horrifying what happened. But this is the one that worries me, and I do see this happening in my friends. The gradual closing off of the mind, you know, you move more and more into that local walled community to the rest of the world. And there is, deny it or not, a kind of, in quotes, waiting for death mindset, which I think is a profound hazard, although there must be those for whom it's a blessing. But I worry about that. How do you stay in a place like that with a good active mind? My one friend won't take part in the activities, and yet she says, you forget about the rest of the world, you know, and that's awful. You know, you're still alive. I don't know, maybe I'll be one of the worst, who knows. So at the same time that all this is going on, we're fighting to be alive and real and significant. At the same time, we need to spend our last years teaching ourselves how to die. Samuel Johnson was right when he said that the certainty of death concentrates the mind wonderfully. If you don't know that quote, he was actually referring to a man whom he knew was to be hanged in 2 weeks. He said, that will concentrate your mind. Now we spend more time than ever before in our lives, whether we're educated, uneducated, somewhere in between, thinking of the great questions of philosophy that are now real and immediate. We know, as we've never known before, that we're going to die, and soon. And most of us work very hard to remain cheerful and not to turn away from the world and to enjoy the benefits of being old. Our lives are less stressful. A 350,000 person study of people 85 and older concluded that old people are much happier than young people, those over 85, which I haven't quite reached yet. Ask me to speak again once I hit 85. We are finally able to express our creativity, and some insist we are more creative when we're old. We become genuinely happy and made happy by the smallest things. The greatest thing, though, about old age, and so valuable, you forget these minor tribulations and that sorrow that's always hanging around back there. My dear old Peter, gone now for 15 years this summer. Think of him every day. My mom is sitting on my shoulder. She's been dead 35 years, you know. Anyway, the great thing is that we can now evaluate life. We can consider our place in the mystery of life. The intimate, daily life horizons are closing in, but the soul skips through them to the wider universe. How wonderful it is to finally make some degree of sense about your life, to admit to and weigh your own faults, and to see clearly the things that you can now be proud of, to be surprised all over again by life, your own and others, to settle down at last, ambition largely stilled, I'm still working on that one, desire muted, and seen at last as trivial, while a deep understanding of what truly matters is taking over. As the painter Paul Gauguin in 1897 said, putting it more simply and directly, it's the name of one of his paintings, where do we come from? What are we? Where are we going? Thank you.